This week, we're focusing in on a pretty non traditional idea as we go through and continue our discussions about marriage. And so it's something that is really highly debated, let's say, as I have discussed this over the years with my students. It's a marriage contract. And so our reading this week actually is the article where this idea came from. So it's a couple named Betsy and Warren, and they write a marriage contract with each other each year because they're, I believe, both in their second marriage, and they decided that they wanted to approach it in a much more hands on, careful manner. And so, if you have not read this week's article before listening to this lecture, I'm going to encourage you to just stop this right here, go read the article. You know it's not terribly long, and then come back to listen to this so that we can discuss it together. But please make sure that you've read the article before we talk about it. So if you haven't, go ahead and read it. And if you have, let's keep talking about it. So I'm going to bring up just parts of the interview. I'm certainly not going to read them again to you because I know you've already read them, but so that we can discuss a few different little aspects of it. Um, I'm in a position right now, actually, when I'm recording this, that I just happened with my sociology of family classes today to have done this there with my students there. And so we got to kind of have this conversation and then this debate about, well, whether or not this is a good idea. Sorry, I had to take a sip of water. Or if it's problematic, right? And so, would you do this or not? That's really kind of the underlying question. And so, what I usually end up having happen is students, when we talk this through and everything else, and I then say to the whole class, okay, who's going to have a marriage contract? And nobody raises their hand. Maybe one person raises their hand and then like puts their hand back down really fast. Like we're all really, really hesitant to do it. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. I want to point out, this particular slide is taking the part where Betsy and Warren are talking about, what the hardest part is. And so, Betsy, you can see, says to be told that you're not measuring up in some way is tough to hear. And so I think that is one of the fears that can come from this. But also, we were talking about today, which I think is a really good point, that I don't think has come up over the years. Um, when you're arguing, because it's inevitable, right? People are going to argue. Like, are you going to kind of misuse the contract and kind of use it as a weapon almost? Like, can't do that. That's in the contract. You're breaking the contract. You can't do that. It's in the contract. Because that kind of defeats the purpose if you're going to use the contract as a threat. And so maybe that's sometimes our hesitation. And so I think that there's a couple of fears. And so I would imagine so much of this, when you think about it, is about trust, right? Do you trust your partner to not, in times of stress and argument, to be like, well, you can't do this because it's in the contract, the contract, right? Because at that point, you'd be like, screw the contract and like crumble that stuff up. So that's one thing that I want to bring up. Something else that I want to bring up too, as you see that they also talk about, and I think it's just beautiful when you see Warren's words, like, I'm unabashedly deeply in love with my wife. Like, that's just, you can feel, I think, his emotion through those words in some ways. And so I think by virtue of the fact that a couple is willing to have a marriage contract is already like that they're leaps and bounds ahead, because they're committing to the fact that we want to discuss our marriage. We want to be respectful and kind and negotiate and figure out and be clear about what works for you and what works for me and what is fair. Right? I'm saying those critical thinking words again. Clear, fair, systematic, and that you're being organized and logical and things along those lines. They, like, when you are willing to do that, like, you are already, it's almost in the place where you probably don't even need the marriage contract because of your willingness to do it. And so again, I turn to all of us that would be not raising our hand and saying we're willing to do it, and why that is. Because I'm sitting here I've taught about a marriage contract because I think it's an intriguing idea for years now. Do I have a marriage contract? Of course I don't, right? So I'm a total hypocrite. Total hypocrite. It's not like I can be like, well, and then my marriage contract. I don't have one. And it's probably because I would not want to be like, I don't know, like have my, you know what, like be, I'm trying not to say a bad word, like called on my shit. There, I said the bad word. Like, you really have to look it in the face if you are going to hear from the person that you love that there's something that you do that really, hurts and or bothers them, and you know you shouldn't do it, and you write down that you're not going to do it, and then you persist and you continue to do it. Like an example of this would be, I have a tendency to be a little bit impatient, and I'm probably not terribly kind when I am impatient about and easily, quickly frustrated about things. Like when you don't think something through and something goes wrong and it would have been easily avoidable, like those kinds of situations. I am not my kindest with my spouse. And so I really should work on that I have a little bit more patience in those moments where something has gone wrong and it probably could have been prevented if somebody had been more careful or remembered or whatever the situation is at hand. And so if we were to write that down, that, when something gets forgotten or screwed up, and like a logistical thing, um, like years ago, Sean and I got into a gigantic argument over the fact that he didn't purchase enough lettuce at Costco for us to host a dinner. Yeah, I'm really amazing at being married. I really should not be teaching this class. But I mean, we really, honestly, that's one of the biggest arguments we ever ended up having. That was the impetus, of course. Then you know how arguments go. You start over something minuscule that is, not that big a deal, and then all of a sudden, it's the world's biggest deal. Um, like I just, but that's my nature, is that I instantaneously snap, and so that's the type of thing. Would I want to be called on it? And so I hope while I'm talking and rambling on about, lettuce at Costco, that you're thinking about what are the things that you struggle with. Because again, I will repeat, this is a chance to be reflective and think about where you get the ideas and how it is you struggle, and what it is you want to do better. So, okay, some last thoughts on this. We've covered the fact that I think you would have to be careful about not using the contract as kind of a defensive mechanism by saying you can't do it, it's in the contract. We talked about the fact that, we don't want to be called on the things that we struggle with. And so, as a kind of a final thought, just if you were, and granted, you'll be doing this in your discussion board this week, if you were to write a marriage contract, what do you think should be included? What would you ask for? And why would you ask for it? What good could come out of it, right? Like, I really think, and email me next year and be like, so, Nora or Professor Griffin, whatever, how's that marriage contract going that you wrote? And I'll probably hang my head in shame and be like, I haven't done it. But how many people really do it, right? How many people really have a marriage contract besides Betsy and Warren, who seem pretty perfect? Um, Technically, I think everyone that gets married, right? Because what are marriage vows? They are a marriage contract of sorts. And we have the ones that are ubiquitous, right? That we all, I've started to say them right now. Um, you need to, be with each other to have and to hold, for richer and poorer. Now you're saying it, right? In sickness and in health. And until when? Until death do you part. Like, we have that. And technically that's contractual. It's a legal document, a marriage license. And so do we revisit them? Do we consciously sit down and have the tough conversations in a respectful manner? Do we think about what it is we can do to be the best version of ourselves and be that person in our relationships? That's what we're getting at when we're discussing and thinking about and writing our own marriage contracts this week. And so maybe none of us do it, maybe all of us do it. No matter what, I really, really hope that you find it to be a valuable exercise to think through what should be included and what ultimately needs to be included as aspects of a strong, kind, loving, respectful, thriving marriage.